What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another Swift video. In today's video, we're going to be doing all the basics of Swift UI. So we're going to be putting together this awesome looking Facebook app. We're going to build the feed, we're going to build stories, the header, that search bar you see there. It's going to look beautiful in dark mode. We're going to also look at some basics of passing around data with the like button, and we're also going to refactor everything to be nice and professional. Now, don't be too scared by it. It is fairly basic Swift UI, and we're going to do everything together. So smash that like button, get excited, and let's dig straight into it. All right, we're going to begin by opening up Xcode and creating a new project. We're going to want to select this iOS tab and stick with an app template here to get started. So let's go ahead and call our project Facebook. And you want to make sure your interface and lifecycle are both set to SwiftUI. With your language set to Swift, go ahead and continue. We'll save it to our desktop for now. And let's jump straight into it. So we're going to close up this right panel. Let's expand our window to give ourselves a little more room to work. And we're going to be working primarily in this file, the content view. So I'm also going to close up this left panel so we have even more screen real estate. And the first thing you want to do is hit this resume button over here so you can load up the preview of your SwiftUI app. Now, previews can be a little finicky and a little slow, so I suggest being a little patient with it. Once it loads up, it makes your iteration process much faster, but it's definitely a little slow. And I don't find myself using them too much, which is why we hit that resume button nice and early. So as that's loading up here, let me expand this so we have more code room. Let's also bump up the font size here. You'll also notice perhaps your computer fan turn on, since loading the preview for some reason takes a while. So there is our preview. So cool. So what are we going to be building? We're going to be building that Facebook design you saw at the very beginning of the video, and we're going to jump straight up into it. So we have our content view here, and by default, we have this hello world text label. So we're going to want to go ahead and get rid of this. And we're going to first introduce the concept of stacks. So stacks are basically what they sound like. You can organize user interface elements vertically, horizontally, or on the z-axis. So think of something on top of each other on the phone. So the first thing we want in our stack, if you remember the design, is the Facebook title up here, as well as that account button. So how do we create that Facebook title? Well, you just saw that text there, so we're just going to go ahead and add Facebook here. And what I actually went ahead and beforehand and did was I grabbed the Facebook RGB color value. So I'm going to say Facebook blue here. And I'm just going to paste that in. Go ahead and feel free to copy these numbers. I just Googled them. That's where I got these numbers for the nice new Facebook Crayola blue color. So we're going to want to assign that as the foreground color of our text. Just like that. Now, what's a foreground color? So obviously here you can see, well, it's not updating. It's a little slow to update sometimes. If you see the resume button up here, go ahead and hit that resume button. But first of all, our text is kind of small. There it goes. It went and updated. So let's go ahead and bump up our font size. And we also want to fix up the alignment. So we're going to give it a font. Now, before we even specify the font, something to understand is these things that we're adding onto the text are known as modifiers. They get applied to style and update the component they're being applied on in order. So for example, in this case, we're applying the font first and then the foreground color. So for the font, we're going to stick with a system font with a size, weight, and style. And these numbers, I'm honestly just going to guess. So we're going to go 48. We're going to try a bold. And we're going to stick with default here. Let's see what that looks like. So it looks pretty good. Looks maybe a little large. We might have to tweak it and tone it down a little bit. But let's fix up the alignment now. So now we want this to be on the left, but we also want it to be at the top. And then we also want a little account button on the right of it. So the simplest way to do this, and this is the power of stacks, is let's go ahead and throw this into an HStack. Paste in that text once again. Now inside of here, we want to bring in an image that looks like a account button. So it's going to be an image with a system name. And this is going to be, I believe, person.circle is one of the ones that's built into SF symbols. And if you're not familiar with SF symbols, I'll actually go ahead and open it up fairly quickly. You can Google this, and this is Apple's very own collection of symbols. So there's over 2,400 symbols in here, and they're free to use. No more creating your own symbols or finicking around and trying to grab something for Google Images. You can change all the colors. There's multicolor support. As you can see here, they're really well made. They're beautiful. So go ahead and definitely give this a download if you don't have it already. Let's close that up and go back to Xcode. Now we see here that we now have a horizontal setup of the Facebook title and this button, which is in fact just an image in our case. So first of all, this image is small and they're too smushed together. So how do we separate them? So that brings in the concept of a spacer. So a spacer is a very simple view in which it's a view basically that fills up the remainder of the space and pushes elements apart. So you can see the spacer is taking up this space now, and we now have Facebook to the left and this image all the way to the right. But they're also lined up flush to the edges of the screen, and that doesn't look too great. So how do we fix that? So we can just add a modifier to this whole horizontal stack to give it some padding. And if you take a look now it's starting to look much better. Now let's also give this a different color. Let's also make it a little larger. So let's go ahead and give this a frame with a fixed width, height, and alignment. Let's see, we want this one right here, and I'm gonna guess that 38 is probably large enough. As you guess and get better and better at guessing these numbers, you're gonna kind of know what to guess, and it looks like it's a little too small, so we're actually gonna make it 50 and see if that looks nicer. Sometimes what's tricky with these previews is that it doesn't always fill up the space. So here we have this being large. Let's give this a background color, and let me make sure that it is in fact the correct size. So let's give it a background of red. All right, looks like it is. Now what we also want to do on this image is add the resizable modifier. So it actually does size up to fill up our actual frame. So that looks about right. Let me actually make it a little smaller. And let's get rid of this background color, and we're going to set a foreground color so we can give it a nice gray-esque color. So here we're going to say color, and let's go with secondary label, so it's like a nice light gray. So all right, looking good. So we've got our header bar just about done. We just want to push it all the way to the top. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're on this vertical stack. Inside of it, we have this horizontal stack, which is our actual Facebook text and the icon we brought in. And similar to how we use the spacer here to push this element and this element apart, we're just going to add a spacer in our vertical stack right down here. And you'll notice that bumps everything up to the top. And that's how we create the header bar. In the next section, we're going to look at creating a really nice looking search bar. All right, so this is where we left off with our really cool looking header. And the next thing we want to do is bring in a text field to serve as a search bar. So we're going to do that right below this horizontal stack here. And all we're going to do is start by adding a text field. The first parameter of this guy is going to be the placeholder. So it's going to be search. And the second parameter is going to be a little different. This is going to be a bindable property. And bear with me while we just type this out, and then I will explain. Basically, SwiftUI needs a way to figure out what text is typed in here so we can update the UI in real time. So we need to add this $text here, and let's disregard the error for a second. And up here, we're going to say at binding, and we're going to create a property called text, and its type is going to be string. Now you'll see this error goes away, but in our preview code, we're getting an error now because we need to pass this in. And we're going to start by passing in constant of an empty string. Now there's actually one more place you're going to have to adjust this. And if you actually hit resume, let's see, what are we just going to pop up for? Cannot find start. So let's go ahead and close this because Xcode is deciding to be strange. Let's hit this one more time. Now what's going on here is we actually need to update this, if I'm not mistaken, right in here as well, which is the main for the app. And notice we have our content view here, but we also need to specify the parameter, which is going to be once again constant with an empty string. Let's go back to our content view here and close up this left panel. And let's try this one more time. Let's go ahead and hit run. Sometimes this loves to really not work. So if you have this issue, go ahead and close your Xcode window, open up Xcode again, and let's open that up one more time. Sometimes previews are flaky, like I mentioned in the very beginning. So if you hit that issue, like I just did here, don't hesitate to close up Xcode and just reopen it. It's probably Xcode's fault, not yours. And there we are. And as we can see already, we already have this text field right below it. Now, one thing you'll notice is there's no background color on it. There's also no corner radius. It's kind of not the nicest looking thing. So we're gonna go ahead and fix this. So let me zoom out of my simulator a little bit here since it's a little large. All right, let's go ahead and add some modifiers on here to make it look a little nicer. So the first thing we're gonna wanna do is we're gonna want to add some padding. So let's add some padding. Let's make it 7. And we're also going to want to add a background color and some more padding. So adding padding definitely will make it look better. The next thing we're going to want to do is add a background color. And this is going to be a color, and we're going to stick with a gray, but instead of the standard gray, we're going to go with gray 5, I believe, which is a bit of a lighter gray, so it's not as prominent. Now let's see, what else do we want to do? We also want to give it some more padding, so on the horizontal side, it actually gets spaced out a little bit more. And here I'm going to say, let's say 15. And we also want the edges to be rounded. So I'm going to come in here and say, let's say 7. And just so you can see that background a little bit better, let's go ahead and make this something a little more standout-ish. So let's make this red and let's see what that looks like. So we definitely have our background color showing up here. Now we might want to put the background color at the very bottom here so our corner radius is applied before our actual background color is applied. So you'll notice a couple of things change. Firstly, the background color is applied to the whole piece now instead of just being applied to the padding. So if we do Control Z and we apply it after the 7, you'll notice that the background color is now applied to the actual padded version of the fields. So let's see what else we can do. So we've got that set up. Let's go ahead and move this corner radius up here. Let's see if that makes it better. So it looks like that did actually make it better. It's very subtle. Let me bump up the size of this to maybe 13 to see what that looks like. So as you guys can really probably tell, a lot of SwiftUI is playing with these numbers and seeing what really looks right and feels right. And now let's go ahead and make this a gray 5 again so we can reset it back to our better looking color just like that. So cool, it looks like we're in business. We've got a header. We've got a pretty cool looking search bar. What else do we need? We actually need the main component here, which is our feed. And we're not only going to do a couple posts, but we're also going to do stories. So how do we want to structure that? So right below this, we're going to stub this out before we flip to the next section. And we're going to stub this out. We're going to have a ZStack, which, like I mentioned, is basically a Z-axis stack. So you can imagine things stacked up on top of each other. In this ZStack, we're going to start off with a color. And the color is going to be a system secondary background color. Let's see, secondary system background color. And the reason we're using these system colors is you're going to see that we're going to fully support dark mode as we're building this also. We're also going to refactor all this business at the end as our code is going to get pretty long pretty quickly. Now inside this Z stack, we're going to want a scrollable vertical stack, which is going to serve as our feed. So we're going to want to scroll view, and this is going to be vertical. And inside of this, we're going to want a VStack. And here, let's go ahead and flip to our next section, and let's take a look at building out that horizontally scrolling stories component. All right, so in the last section, we left off with our awesome looking header and our search bar, and we stubbed out our feed here with our Z stack and our V stack. And now in this video, we're going to take a look at putting together our stories component. Now, how are we going to do that? So here we have the scroll view, which is vertical, and inside of it we have a VStack because our actual feed needs to scroll vertically. But we actually want to put our stories component in a horizontally scrolling view. So how do we do that? Well, it's pretty simple. We just create a scroll view. We're going to make it horizontal, just like that. And you might not get the autocomplete. What we're also going to do is we're also going to assign the shows indicator property. If you don't see it pop up like I don't there, go ahead and open it up this way, and you can see that it gives you the constructor like that. So let's go ahead and make this horizontal. Here we're going to make this false. And this second parameter here basically makes sure we don't see those scroll bars since they don't look very nice in the actual component. Now in this actual scroll view, we've got a horizontal scroll view. We're going to in here throw an HStack. And we're actually going to give this a parameter. And now notice that we don't actually have a parameter right now. And the reason that we don't is because in SwiftUI, a lot of these parameters have default values. So if you don't provide them, it's a little misleading that they don't exist, but they in fact do. They just have default values that Apple has set when they went and put together SwiftUI. So go ahead and just open up the parenthesis and you'll be able to see what's available to you. So in our case, we're just going to stick with the spacing and we're going to make it 3. So all of our stories aren't too far apart. So now what is a story? Essentially, we're just going to put images in here. We're not going to be dealing with tapping and actually playing them out, but we just want an image. And I'm just going to give it an empty string before we bring in the image itself. And we're going to want to give this a fixed frame with a width and a height. And I'm totally going to guess these numbers just so we can get a nice size story. And we're also going to go ahead and give it a background color so we can see it more properly. So here we'll go ahead and say we give it a color of red. And it looks about right to me. Let's go ahead and copy and paste this, let's say 2 more times. We see we have our stories next to each other, but I don't like how this is flush with the edge of the screen. So we're going to use our trusty modifier and go ahead and give this some padding and looking much better. So now let me go ahead and actually paste this a whole time over. So we have 6 of these now, so they're definitely off the edge of the screen. So we'll go ahead and see and make sure that it is truly scrollable. So now how do we bring in an image? So I've actually gone ahead and created these images beforehand, and I just grabbed them from Google Images, and I created this assets folder here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and drag this in, and we're gonna make sure this is checked. We're gonna click this button to copy them in. Let's close this up. And if we jump into here, you'll see that we have these image sets. So we've got, first of all, person avatars for our actual posts. Then we've got these stories here. So they're just 3 random images. Now, if you wanted to create these yourself, you can go to the existing assets file, right click, bring in a new image set, name it whatever you want, and you just drag your image right in here to this 1x box. But since I've already got them for the sake of not wasting anyone's time, we're just going to go ahead and use these. We can see I've named them story 1, 2, and 3. Let's jump back to our content view and close up that left panel. Let me also collapse this a little bit since our code is getting a little long here. So let's go ahead and give this a story 1, story 2, story 3. Let's go ahead and start with that. Let's go ahead and hit resume here. Let's see what happens. So what you'd expect to happen is the image just shows up in here, and we'll see if that actually ends up happening. So it looks like the image definitely showed up, but it's a little large, clearly. It's overflowing the edges of the actual container, so we need to clip it. But we also want to make sure we maintain the aspect ratio. So we're going to give this a modifier of resizable, first and foremost. The next thing we're going to give it is an aspect ratio with a content mode, and this is going to be fill. And let's see if that improved it at all. Let's go ahead and hit resume. It probably improved it, but the one thing that we can't actually visually tell the difference is because we need to clip this to its container. And once again, we're going to use a modifier here, and we're going to go ahead and say clipped. And if you run it one more time now, or if it just auto updates here, sometimes it decides to be super slow. Bear with it, give it a few seconds. You'll see that it's actually working appropriately. And actually, let me go ahead and get rid of these other ones down here because these might be overflowing and taking up our trusty screen real estate. So there we are. We have our story showing up. Now we could just copy and paste this, or we can use a for loop. So I'm just going to stub out a for loop just to give an example of how you would use it. So let's say we wanted a for each loop over stories. We're going to have an ID in here. We're going to use \self, and in here we're going to have name in, and here we're going to pass in name. Now, what is stories? So stories is going to be an array of these story elements that we have created as strings. So it's going to be an array of strings. Here we're going to say story 1, story 2, and story 3. So those of you familiar with Swift can probably realize we can probably make that actual array with a map, but just for the sake of keeping this nice and simple, we're going to go ahead and see if we can do it that way. So let's see. We've got diagnostics here. We're going to try again. Hopefully I don't have an error anywhere. We see our stories. Let's see what's going on here. So we've definitely got our for loop. We're passing in our image. And we should see it show up here. Looks like we're not seeing it. We're definitely passing it in. So let's see what's going on. So we're passing in our stories. We're showing them here. Let's go ahead and add a spacer right below it. Let's see if that fixes it at all. There it is. So sometimes it decides to just be a little slow. If I get rid of the spacer, it should in fact still show up. We shouldn't need a spacer, but previews once again are kind of the bane of my existence because sometimes they're great, like they are kind of in this video. Sometimes they're a little bit of a pain. So now we have 3 stories here. So I'm going to copy and paste this a few more times. So here we're going to do this one more time and say it's 1, 2, and 3. Now clearly they're not on the screen. So what I'm going to do is in here, we're going to select our 12 Pro Max simulator. We're going to hit that play button so we can actually get the simulator booted up to do a little bit of a testing here. You can also optionally hit this little play button in the preview, and you should be able to use this here. Sometimes previews, even in that mode, aren't the most reliable, so I just tend to opt into using the simulator since it's a little more realistic in general of testing these things out. But once we have this working and good to go, we can go ahead and jump into creating our actual feed posts, which in my opinion is kind of the more fun part of this and really brings the app together. So hopefully our simulator doesn't take too long here to boot up. While it's doing that, actually, we could think about some of that feed. So here we've got a VStack in our vertical scroll view here. And the first thing we threw in here was this horizontal scroll view. And that was for our stories. And right below this, we can basically start bringing in our actual Facebook posts. Now we're going to create that as a separate view down here, even though I said we're going to refactor later on. And the reason we're going to do that is to avoid a bunch of code here, any other issues. So we should have this booted up, which we do. And you can notice we can actually scroll through this as expected. And it's super, super cool. And not only can you do that, but you can actually type in this text field as well. And everything updates very seamlessly. And if you hit, let's go ahead and close that. If you hit Command-Shift-A, you'll see that we're fully supporting dark mode already. Not only does this look really cool, but we also have the different color down here where our posts are gonna go. So we're gonna get a really nice contrast. So let's go ahead and close up this section. And in the next section, we're gonna go ahead and put together reusable Facebook posts. And in the last section, we're gonna take a look at some very basic passing around data. And in that case, how to tap the like button to switch from a like to unlike state. So I'll see you in the next section. All right, guys, welcome back to the next section. In the last section, we left off with our stories component basically done. And in this section, we're going to take a look at creating a Facebook post view and how to make it reusable so we can use it for multiple posts. So we're going to first start off by just creating a new view here, and we're going to call it a Facebook post, and it's going to be of view. And in here, we're going to have a body, which is going to return some view. Now this might look familiar because it's in fact identical to what we've got going on up here. This is how you create any view in SwiftUI, so you're gonna get super used to doing this. Now we've got an error in here already because we're not actually returning any view. So let me just go ahead in here and put a text with some post. Now we should see all our errors go away just like that. And down here in our actual scroll view with a VStack in it, we're going to put in a Facebook post. And I'm just going to throw a spacer right below it. So as we build out our actual post, you'll see it show up here. We've already got it showing up. Hopefully, if we hit that resume button, we should see the text show up here, but there it goes. While it does that, let's think about what a Facebook post needs. So Facebook posts, more or less, is just a couple stacks with different types of info. So the first thing we want in here, if you think about it, is a vertical stack. In a post, the top half of it is going to be the profile picture, the name, when the post was made, and the second stack will be the post, and the third stack is going to be the actual like, comment, and share buttons. So let's go ahead and stub those out. So we're going to want one HStack, and this is going to be the profile picture and name. This one's going to be the actual text of the post, and this one will be the like, comment, and share button. So let's start with this first one here. And we're going to want some spacers between these as well, but let's get there in a moment. So this first one here, we're going to want to create a image, and this image is going to be the profile picture for the person. And if you recall, we brought in some profile pictures inside our XC assets. So we're going to go ahead and create a person one in here. Let's make sure we do those quotes correctly. And we see good old Mark Zuckerberg pop up in here. And the first thing you'll notice, it's quite a large picture. So let's go ahead and make that resizable, so it's a little less large and scary. And let's go ahead and now add a frame on here with a width, height, and alignment. And once again, I'm going to guess that 40 by 40 might be an appropriate size here. So let's go ahead and also give this a alignment of center. Now that looks a little small, but we'll see in a second if that's all right. Let's go ahead and actually make it 50 by 50 since it's going to bug me. Now the next thing that we want to do in here is also make sure that we maintain the aspect ratio. So we're going to say aspect ratio, content mode is going to be fill. So we're going to want to make sure we fill up the frame. And finally, it would be really cool if we have a nice circular image. So we're going to give this a 25. And the reason I got 25 here is half of the width or the height, because it's a square will give you a circle. So we've got our profile picture showing up. Now you'll notice that we need to bring in a component on the right of it, and this is a horizontal stack, so we can actually just bring it in, and we're going to bring in a VStack. And the reason we want a VStack in here is because in the VStack, we're going to have the person's name. Hopefully I spelt that right. And right below it, we're going to have another string in a text, and that's going to be how long ago this was posted. So we're going to say 12 minutes ago, just like that. Now you'll notice everything is center aligned, and that's not exactly what we want. So we're going to go ahead and bring in a spacer on the right of this in the HStack. So everything gets pushed to the left. So you'll start to notice that things are starting to look better. However, these are still centered, the two labels, and we're also flush up against the edge of the phone. So that's not what we want. So what do? We've learned we're going to bring in our trusty padding, and we're going to put it on the entire VStack of the post. All right, looking much better. What else do we want to do? Now we want the actual text to be left aligned also. Now this is a VStack. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is we want to embed this into an HStack. So if you actually right click, let's see if I can find it. You can actually do refactor, and you can actually embed these into different stacks. Looks like I'm not seeing the option here right now, or maybe I am missing it. But definitely there are ways to refactor your code with simple right click and refactors. And here you'll actually see that you have the options, but they're actually grayed out for whatever reason. You'll see you can extract it and whatnot, but I'm gonna go ahead and do it manually. Let's go ahead and make this an HStack. And let's make this an HStack as well. Now you might be asking, why do we make this an HStack? Because it looks identical. We still have this problem where we have them centered. The reason we did that is because we can put in a spacer on the right of both of these text elements. You'll notice it pushes them to be left aligned. Now our text is a little small, and we also want to play with the color so it's not the same font and color for both. So here we're going to say the foreground color is going to be blue for the actual person's name. So that looks a little better. We're also going to want to give it a font, and I'm going to stick with a system font with a size, weight, and a style here. So let's go with 18. This one's going to be semi-bold, and this is going to be default. Looks like I spelled something wrong in here. Let's see, we've got system size 18, weight, might be all lowercase. There we are, semi-bold, design default. Looking much better. Now the time, I think that's sizing wise probably fine, but what we can go ahead and do is give this a lighter color. Let's give this a foreground color of secondary label, which is just a lighter label in both light mode and dark mode. Now, if you guys remember when I was saying that views are going to get fairly large, you can see our file has gotten exponentially bigger. So we're also going to take a look at refactoring and how to make this a more properly organized file and piece of code. So we've got this header piece done in our post. What do we want next? Now the next thing is the actual post that we're going to create, and that's going to go in this HStack, which is the next one. So let me separate these out a little bit. And we're going to put a spacer between the header here and this HStack right below it. And this is basically just going to have a text in it and a spacer on the right of it. And this is going to be a post. So let's go ahead and say, hey guys, I made this cool website called the Facebook to see if I'm cool or not. And let's go ahead and make sure that pops up here. Definitely pops up. It's also left aligned, so looking really good. Let's put some modifiers on here to make it a little larger, since it's definitely a little small. So we're going to say system font once again. Let's go with 24, regular, and default. Once again, totally guessing these values. Definitely play with them and definitely spell them correctly. Otherwise, you're going to hit errors like I am. So let's see, that's looking much better, more appropriately sized. You can also put a modifier on here, even though it's already left aligned, of multi-line alignment, I believe. And we can make sure that this is leading. And let's see, so that's looking good. Now we want the buttons down here. Now, of course, we're gonna want a like, comment, and share. So now in this HStack, we're gonna wanna bring in our 3 buttons. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a button. It's gonna have an action in it, and it's also gonna have a label in it. And the label is going to be what we actually want to show up in the button's text. So we're going to start off with like here. And you'll notice we get this like button down here. It's a little small. We're going to style it up in a moment. But let's go ahead and copy and paste this 2 more times and update the values here. So this will be comment and this will be share. So you'll notice that they're super close to each other, not what we want. What are we gonna do? We're gonna bring in our trusty spacer and we're gonna space these buttons out to be nice and horizontally wide across the whole post. And we also want a little bit of space between the actual post and those buttons. So what do? We can bring in a spacer here. We could also add padding to the bottom HStack. Let's see what that spacer does, if anything. Looks like we still want a little more room in here. So I'm gonna bring in a padding modifier and throw it onto that horizontal stack for our actual buttons. And if you look at that, we're looking much, much better. All right, so now that we have this set up, now our buttons don't do anything. We are gonna have a section where we take a look at this like button, but let's see how we can make this post reusable. So we don't want the same post from Mark here over and over, because let's be real, who wants to hear from Mark that much? But what we actually want to do in all seriousness is we want to have this Facebook post take in parameters. So here we're going to say that the first thing that we want to pass into the post is a name. We also want to pass in the post itself. And we also want to pass in an image name. And once we pass these in, we can actually go ahead and use these here instead of our hard-coded values. So that'll be that. This is going to be name. I'm going to copy this one here, which is the post, so I don't have to type it again. And now what we can do here, where we used our Facebook post, you can see it's already yelling at us before I even got there. We can actually go ahead and put in the name here. So we can say Mark Zuckerberg. Post is our post. And what is this one here? Our image name is person1. And I believe I grabbed 3 person images. So we similarly could put this in a for loop like we did for stories and keep all of our data up here. Let's be a little lazy and just copy and paste it for the sake of time. Make this one person 2, this one person 3. I don't recall what the actual people are. I believe person 2 is Jeff Bezos. Let's go ahead and see. Or for our preview, yep, Jeff Bezos. So let's go ahead and update these names. And this is not something Jeff would say. You'll all see once I take over the world with Amazon. And this last one here is going to be Bill Gates. And this is going to be who cares? I made Windows. All right, so we've got our post here, and rather posts. Let's go ahead and hit that run button, and let's see if we can scroll and actually get this looking good in dark mode too. So we're actually in dark mode already, so let's see what this looks like. Bear with the trusty simulator. So we can scroll. We've got our posts here, definitely looking good. But if you notice, our actual posts don't even have a background color. So what do we need to do that? We're going to go ahead and we are going to add a background modifier, and this is going to be color, and this is going to be a system background color. And we're also going to add a corner radius for the sake of looking a little nicer. And we're going to hit that run button. Let's see what that looks like. All right, bear with it just a little. All right, looking much better. So not only do we have a nice corner radius, but we have our actual post in its own box. So if we actually go ahead and hit Command-Shift-A, you'll notice that it supports light mode and dark mode. And I don't know about you guys, but it looks pretty darn good. And you can scroll these. And with just a little SwiftUI, you can put together a fairly cool looking app. So let's go ahead in the next section and see how we can tap on this like button and actually have something go ahead and happen here. In that case, updating the button state and the view. So I'll see you in the next section. All right, guys, welcome back to the next section here. In the last section, as a quick refresher, we put together these reusable post views, and we pass in the name, post, and image name here. In this section, we're going to take a look at how to manipulate some data and our UI in turn, specifically liking and unliking the post. So let's dig in. So we're going to start by bringing in a property called isLiked, and it's going to be a bool, and by default, it'll be false. And the most important thing you want to deal with is you want to give it an annotation of @state. So a little bit of a technical deep dive. So a Facebook post here is a struct. In SwiftUI, views are treated as structs, and as you might know or you may not know, structs are very cheap, and SwiftUI creates and destroys them very quickly. So if we want to hold any type of state in our actual object, in this case, if a post is liked or not, how do we do that? Because if our struct is destroyed and created over and over, we're going to lose that information. And that's exactly why Apple made this state annotation for any type of property you want to retain the state for. In this case, it's is liked. So I'm going to go ahead and in this like button, every time we tap it, we want something to happen. And that something is we're going to toggle this is liked. And here we can say if the post is liked, we're going to show liked. Otherwise, we're going to show like. Now you'll also notice if you come up here, you'll have some errors. You might not actually, just kidding, you won't have errors because we gave this a default value of false. If you didn't give this a default value of false like that, you'll see that this will start to yell at you to pass in is liked. But because every single post is false in terms of is liked by default, you'll go ahead and see no errors. And that's actually all it takes to bring in a way to update this. So if we go ahead and hit this, you'll notice that it changes from like to liked. And this is really the power of declarative programming, where if you were building this in the traditional UI kit way, you would have to do a lot of view updating yourself. But what did we do here to achieve this? All we're doing in this like button action is we're just toggling this is liked. Now that tells SwiftUI, hey, our source of truth data has changed, and it goes ahead and it computes the difference in the view, and it goes ahead and renders it out. Now if we change it back to light mode, still looking pretty darn good. And of course, in an actual real world app, you would go ahead and hit some API and make some update in your backend to actually save the like. But that's how you use some basic data and change the state of your UI. Now in the next and last section, we're gonna refactor this to clean things up a little bit so we can call ourselves a little more professional here. So I'll see you guys in that section. What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the last section of SwiftUI for beginners. So far, we've put together all of our app. It works in light mode, it works in dark mode. We've got horizontal components, vertical components we can like, we can unlike, but our code has gotten inevitably a little messy. So we're going to take some time to go back and be professional about it and clean it up a little. So let's dig in. So how are we going to clean this up? So we already have this Facebook post as a separate view here that we're using over and over. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for our stories component here. So we have this array called stories here, and we use a for loop, so we're not that redundant about it. However, we can definitely be a little smarter about it. So let's go ahead and make a new view called stories. Let's call this stories view to be a little more specific. And I'm going to come down here and just call this stories view. It's going to be a view and a body property in here returning some view. We're going to throw this in, and notice we're looping over stories. So what I'm going to want to do here is bring in a property called stories, which is going to be an array of string. And in the initializer of this, we're just going to pass in stories just like that. And just like that, you simplified the readability of this quite a bit. Now, let's also go ahead and put these into actual models here, this information. That way we can use a for loop over this Facebook post, so we don't have to be so redundant about it. So what are we going to do? So I'm going to start by grabbing all this information in our Facebook post view here, and we're going to come to the very top, and we're going to actually move this stuff to separate files in a moment, but let's go ahead and create a Facebook post model. And I'll go ahead and paste that stuff in here just like that. And now what we're going to do in the Facebook post view is we're going to, instead of taking these three things in, we're going to take in a single model of Facebook post. We're going to delete this stuff. And here, this is going to be model dot to get all of these actual elements out. So model dot image name, model dot name, and model dot post. And let's see if we have any errors here. We shouldn't hopefully have any errors. We should have an error here where we're creating these because all of these now need to be created as a model. So instead of passing each of those in, we're going to say this is an FB post model. And in here, we're going to paste in our actual properties. Let's go ahead and see why this is giving us an error. So it cannot find FB post model because I made the O capital. Should be lowercase. Just be careful with your naming here as you copy and paste. As you get more into building things, you'll realize that copy and pasting is probably 50% of the work, but we just need to make sure we're a little smart about it so we don't break anything. So let's make that one more time and paste this in here. And you'll notice that we have essentially just extracted everything, but firstly, we have some errors here. So it can't convert value here, and the reason is because we need to give it a model, parameter name, same thing here. Now, by putting this in a model, what does it clean up? Well, it makes our data more reusable and the constructor, but now what we can go ahead and do is we can actually create all of these in an array, and we can for loop over it, reducing the amount of duplicate code. So let's create a posts here. And first up, it's going to have this in here. You can do Control I to go ahead and fix up that alignment. Then we're going to go ahead and grab the next one. And make sure you grab just the model and not the post itself. And you've probably noticed already, I like to line break my parameters so they go ahead and line up nicely here. You don't have to, it's a little bit stylistic. Do whatever works best for you, whatever you think is most clean. But let's go ahead and grab this last model. We're just going to paste this in with a comma right here. And once again, Control I to fix your indentation for all of you out there with OCD like me. And now we can create a for loop over this posts. So very similar to how we did stories. What we want to go ahead and do in here is do a for each over posts where ID is self. You can say post in. Actually, this should be really model in to be a little more clear. And we can just grab one of these, delete those, and we can pass in our model in here, just like that. And if you go ahead and hit this try again button over here, since the preview is a little wonky, let's see what's going on here. So we've got an ID, we've got a model. Let's see, generic struct for each requires that the model. So let's see, this is posts. Let's see what we assigned it to. We need to assign this to an array of the model. It should be the array already. So let's see what's going on here. So it probably wants the model to be identifiable or hashable. So we can go ahead and make this hashable. And the reason it wants it to be identifiable or hashable, not to get too much into the weeds of it, is because whenever a for loop executes, it needs to be able to specify a unique ID for the actual element. And when you make something hashable, it makes it basically unique in the sense of every single element with different values for the name, post, and image name are going to be unique, and you're going to compute, rather SwiftUI is going to compute a unique hash, just some string value to represent it. And if you go ahead here and hit try again one more time, hopefully we're in business now. We should see build succeeded. And on the right here, you'll see nothing actually changed, which is exactly what we're looking for. But you'll see that our actual view code is not as large. So the important other thing to call out here of why we don't want it to be large is because a view actually has a 10 subview limit here. So here we've got an HStack, a text field, a ZStack, and a spacer. So if you start building really large views, you're going to start hitting errors in SwiftUI. So it's important that you learn to refactor, keep your views nice and concise and small as early as possible. So let's go ahead and move this stuff to separate files. So I'm going to grab our stories view here. Simply going to command exit to cut it. We're going to right click on this and create a new file. We're going to be lazy and stick with a Swift file, and instead of using the template, we're going to call this a stories view. In here, we're going to want to make sure we remember to import SwiftUI. Go ahead and paste that in here. Clearly much more organized. Let's go ahead back to our content view, and let me grab the Facebook post here, which is arguably a fairly large view. We could probably refactor this also, but for the sake of this being a shorter video and not getting too much into the weeds of it, I'll leave that be. So let's go ahead and call this Facebook post view. Go ahead and import SwiftUI, paste that guy in just like that. Let's go back to our content view. And our content view is fairly small now. So just to make sure everything is up and running, let's go ahead and hit that play button to build and run. Nothing here should have broken, fingers crossed. All right, we've got our feed. We can like and unlike, looking beautiful. We can swipe through our stories. Now, this is obviously an image here, not a button, but you can very easily convert this. We can also click in here and type, and you'll notice the text actually respects light mode and dark mode right out of the box, which is honestly pretty amazing. A, because we're using SwiftUI and everything is just dynamic, and B, because we're using dynamic colors here. So there you have it. If you found this video helpful, definitely hit that like button down below. Helps out the video tremendously, helps me create more content for you. Leave a comment if you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, if you want to see any future videos, video suggestions, all that good stuff. A lot of you already have connected with me on LinkedIn. I'm fairly active there now than I used to be, so definitely go give me a follow there. I'm going to be putting this code publicly on my GitHub for everybody and not just for channel members like I usually do. I like to keep code for channel members just so it can support the growth of this channel and the tens and dozens of hours that go into these videos. So this one I'll be making public to make sure we can benefit the larger community. But that all said, this is all I've had for you guys. I hope you found it useful. I hope the SwiftUI is a little less daunting now, and I'd be super thrilled to see what you all build. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the future videos.